A billionaire invited his black driver's daughter to a poker game just for fun. But no one at that table imagined what would happen next, because that little girl wasn't just a child. She was a genius, and what she did that night would change everything. Imagine a glittering poker room high above the city skyline. Golden light bouncing off crystal glasses, the air scented faintly with expensive cigars, and laughter that tastes of money and power. At that table, men who thought they'd seen it, all CEOs, oil magnates, tech giants, people who never imagined anyone could outwit them, let alone a child. Now picture this. A small girl, barely tall enough for the chair. Her hair neatly braided, eyes wide with a mix of fear and something sharper, curiosity. Beside her stands her father, a man who drives these billionaires every day, his uniform pressed, cap in hand, shoulders stiff with silent dread. Because he knows what these men do when they're bored. And tonight, boredom had found a new target, his only daughter. They called it just for fun. But to him, it felt like walking into a lion's den with nothing but hope to protect her. This story doesn't begin at the poker table. It begins years. Earlier in quiet back seats and whispered lessons, you see her father, though just a driver in the eyes of the rich, had a mind sharper than most knew. Every night, after long shifts, he'd come home tired, but determined to teach his daughter something new. Numbers, memory tricks, puzzles, to stretch her young mind. He did it because he believed the world would never give her a fair chance. So he had to build her mind into a weapon the world couldn't ignore. And she listened. Really listened. To the low hum of engines. To the way people talked when they thought no one could hear. To the secret codes of grown-ups trying to hide the truth. She learned to read the room, not just the words. By the time she was 10, her father knew his daughter wasn't just bright. She was different, special, but the world never noticed, or maybe it chose not to see. Then came the night. Everything changed. It was supposed to be just another late drive for her father. Pick up the billionaire, wait by the curb, and go home. But that evening, the billionaire was in a different mood. He'd had too much to drink, and when someone mentioned poker, his eyes lit up, not with joy, but with a predator's amusement. "Bring your kid," he laughed, the words rolling out carelessly. "Let's see if she can handle real pressure. Come on, it'll be fun." The words chilled the father's blood. Fun. For them, fun was a game of chips and cards. For his daughter, it could mean embarrassment she'd never forget. But what choice did he have? Say no, and risk angering a man whose signature kept his family fed. Say yes, and risk her being humiliated in front of sharks? Heart pounding, he drove home and knocked gently on her bedroom door. "Baby, hey, they want you to come tonight," he whispered, voice cracking in shame. "Just sit there, watch. Maybe play a hand or two. And when you lose, smile and thank them." She looked up at him, quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, Daddy." What she didn't say, what he didn't know, was that every night, when he'd come home exhausted, she had stayed. Up reading books he left lying around. Books about odds, probabilities, and human psychology. Because even at her age, she sensed the world was tilted against them. And maybe, just maybe, knowing how to play the game was the only way to survive. That's how she ended up walking into a room where no child belonged. The doors opened to reveal a table littered with high-value chips, a bartender silently pouring aged whiskey, and men whose suits cost more than her father made in a year. For a heartbeat, she froze, feeling the weight of eyes that saw nothing but a driver's kid. A little girl brought to amuse them, but then something strange happened. Instead of shrinking under their gaze, she raised her chin, just a fraction. Barely enough to see, but enough that her father caught it. In that moment, the father dared to hope. Maybe she wouldn't break. They gave her a chair, high and padded, legs dangling just above the floor. One billionaire, the host. The man who invited her slid a stack of chips in front of her with a smirk. "Play a hand," he chuckled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just for fun." And the room laughed, the sound echoing like marbles rolling on cold stone. But the girl's eyes weren't on the chips. They flickered from one face to another, like she was studying a living puzzle. She saw how one man drummed his fingers when nervous, how another tugged at his cuff when bluffing. She noticed the billionaire's smile was too wide, that it never reached his eyes. Her heart beat so fast she thought everyone could hear it. But she remembered her father's words whispered so many nights ago, numbers never lie. People do. And so, as the cards slid across the green felt toward her, she took her first quiet breath and decided to play. No one at that table knew what they had just invited. And not luck, not chance, but a mind sharper than any of them had ever faced. And in the next few minutes, this little girl, the black driver's daughter, would do something that would leave them all stunned, speechless, and just a little afraid, because it turned out the real game had only just begun before. The billionaires smirk, for the chips clattered across the table. There was a life built quietly in the shadows of the rich, a life that began each day at dawn, when the driver rose, pressed his uniform until it was razor sharp, and walked past cracked paint and leaky pipes to the street, where the company car gleamed like something from another world. A car that wasn't his, but in its reflection. He sometimes glimpsed the man he wanted to be, dignified, in control, capable of giving his daughter a better life. His name was David. To the billionaires he drove, he was just driver or, hey man, but to his daughter Naomi, he was everything. Father, protector, teacher. At night, David returned home exhausted, shoes scuffed from hours of waiting by sidewalks slick with rain. Yet no matter how tired, he knocked gently on Naomi's door. Did you finish the puzzle I left you? What did you notice today that others didn't? They didn't have new clothes or vacations, but they had a ritual richer than gold. Lessons whispered over cracked kitchen counters, laughter over mismatched mugs, and stories about how the mind can be sharper than any sword. Naomi learned early that the world divided people by what it saw on the surface, and what it saw when it looked at her father was a black man in a uniform, a servant. Invisible and polite. What it saw when it looked at her was even less, a child of someone less important. But in their tiny apartment, her father built her mind like an architect. He taught her math, then probability. When she solved problems faster than he could ask them, he gave her harder ones, books about strategy, memory, and the psychology of lies. Not because he wanted her to gamble, but because he wanted her to survive in a world that would always underestimate her. At school, Naomi sat quietly in the back row, eyes watchful. Teachers rarely called on her, assuming the driver's child wouldn't keep up. Other kids whispered, sometimes laughed at her patched backpack. But she noticed things no one else did, who copied answers, who got nervous during tests, which teachers played favorites. She remembered everything. She told no one, and every night. When David returned smelling of road dust and leather seats, she shared what she'd seen. Daddy, Mr. Abrams always looks to the left before he lies. Sasha's mom didn't sign her permission slip. She forged it. David listened, half amused, half awed. Your eyes are your power, Naomi, he'd whisper. And your mind? That's your shield. Meanwhile, far above them, in of glass and steel, the billionaire lived a life as different from theirs as the moon is from mud. He was a man whose smile charmed crowds but chilled those who saw what lay behind it. Power wasn't enough for him. He liked games, especially games that tested how far he could bend other people. His favorite opponent was always someone weaker, someone who couldn't afford to lose. One night, after a profitable day in the markets and too many drinks, he bragged to his guests, "People are just puzzles. You poke, you prod. Eventually, they crack." Someone laughed. "Even your driver?" He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Even his kid?" When David heard the invitation, shame and fear wrestled in his chest. His job had rules. Stay silent. Stay invisible and never, ever draw attention. But how do you say no to a man who signs your paychecks? A man whose wealth could bury you with a single word? That night, David stood by Naomi's door longer than usual before knocking. He had protected her from so much hunger, cold, the blunt edge of prejudice. But tonight, he had to ask her to walk into a lion's den. Naomi. They want you to come. Just sit there, play if they ask. But remember, it's only a game. But to Naomi, nothing was only anything. She saw the fear in her father's eyes. The same father who taught her to never look away when the moment demanded. Courage, she nodded. Okay, Daddy. As she got ready, Naomi tied her braids neatly, smoothed her shirt, and took a final glance in the cracked mirror. She wasn't dressing for wealth, she was dressing for war, with fists, but with the only weapons she owned: observation, memory, and logic. Downstairs, David's hands shook on the steering wheel. His little girl had never been around people who played with others' dignity the way children pull wings off flies. He whispered a prayer, not that she'd win, but that they wouldn't break her spirit. And so they drove toward towers of glass lit by chandeliers worth more than everything David owned. A father who loved fiercely, a daughter who learned silently, and a billionaire waiting to play a game he thought only he could win. What none of them knew yet was that Naomi's mind was about to shatter their expectations and prove that, sometimes, the most powerful player at the table is the one no one sees coming. The car ride felt longer than any Naomi had ever taken, though the city lights blurred by in familiar streams of gold and red. Inside the car, silence clung to the leather seats. David's knuckles whitened around the wheel, the rhythm of his breathing sharp and unsteady. Every few seconds, he glanced at Naomi in the rearview mirror, as though checking to make sure she was still there, still safe, though in truth, safety had already slipped away the moment they said yes. Naomi, small hands folded in her lap, stared out at the city. Glass towers loomed above them, like watchful giants. And she wondered what those windows hid: power, secrets, laughter at other people's fear. In her mind, she quietly recited the multiplication tables, then backwards, a trick her father had taught her to calm racing thoughts, yet no calculation could soothe the truth. Tonight, she was stepping into a room where no one expected her to belong. They were waiting to see her fail. They arrived at the skyscraper's private entrance. Marble floors, golden elevators, a doorman who didn't bother to hide his curiosity. The billionaire's suite sat on the top floor, behind doors taller than David himself. Soft jazz spilled out when the doors opened, but beneath it Naomi could almost hear the hum of tension, of people who smiled too easily and meant none of it. A servant led them in. The poker table, round and heavy, sat at the room's center like a small arena. Plush chairs were arranged around it, each occupied by men whose watches alone could pay off the building's mortgage. They laughed in low, practiced tones. Laughter meant for show, not for joy. And at the head of it all sat the billionaire's silk suit. Cufflinks glinting in the low light, a glass of something amber and aged in hand. His gaze fell on Naomi, and though the smile that touched his lips seemed gentle, his eyes held something colder. Curiosity sharpened by power. "Welcome," he drawled. Voice smooth as polished marble. "We thought we'd see what your little one can do. Just for fun." David's heart twisted. Fun for them, fun cost nothing. For him, it might cost his dignity or hers. "Sir," he began, voice low. "She's only just a few hands," the billionaire cut in, not unkindly, but in a tone that left no room for refusal. "Let's see if brilliance runs in the family." Laughter rippled around the table, polite but pointed. They gave Naomi a seat, far too big for her small frame. A servant placed a glass of water in front of her, the crystal catching the chandelier's light and scattering tiny rainbows across the green felt. She felt every stare. Some amused, some dismissive, a few tinged with faint interest. She knew what they saw. A child brought in as entertainment. A novelty before real play resumed. But Naomi remembered what her father had whispered in the car. "Remember, Princess, it's not about winning or losing tonight. It's about showing them they can't shake you." The cards were dealt. Naomi watched every flick of the dealer's wrist, the way the billionaire's finger tapped twice on the table before each bet. She saw a man to her left hide a nervous cough behind his hand and another to her right who couldn't meet anyone's eyes for long. All around her, grown men acted like they were in perfect control, but Naomi saw the tremors beneath the surface. Small as a heartbeat, her father stood behind her, trying not to hover. His chest burned with fear and pride all tangled together. Pride that she sat so calmly. Fear that the calm might break. The billionaire placed chips before Naomi. More money than she'd ever seen stacked in one place. "Play," he said softly, voice dripping amusement. "Just follow your gut." She nodded, though inside her mind was racing through numbers, probabilities, patterns, and what little she knew of poker rules from watching her father's late-night games with neighbors. The first hand was quick. Naomi folded early, her heart pounding so hard she thought the table might feel it. The billionaire's eyebrows lifted, then smoothed back into that polite mask. "Cautious," he murmured. "Interesting." The second hand, she hesitated longer. A flicker of memory surfaced, her father teaching her about bluffing, about how sometimes not the best cards win, but the best read of people. She watched the billionaire smile, just a hair too tight at the edges. She saw the way a vein in his neck pulsed faster as the pot grew. She made her move. Small, careful, but deliberate. The table fell quiet. Chips clinked as bets were called. Cards turned over. Naomi won. David exhaled, shoulders sagging for the first time all evening. Around the table, someone chuckled. "Beginner's luck, another," murmured, though Naomi saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty. The billionaire leaned back, studying her now not as a child, but as a possible threat, or at least a curiosity worth testing. And just like that, what began as a game for fun turned into something else. Naomi felt it too. The subtle shift in the room's air, the sharpened attention. They were no longer playing just to humor her. They were playing to measure her. The real game had begun, and though Naomi felt the weight of every gaze, she sat straighter, her young face calm. Inside, her mind ticked forward, step by careful step, prepared for what came next. The room went strangely quiet the moment Naomi touched the felt of the poker table. A child at a table built for predators, her small hand brushed the edge of the chips, and for a second the laughter softened. Curiosity replacing mockery. Even the billionaire, who had invited her just for fun, leaned back slightly, watching more carefully than before. But Naomi felt the weight of every stare. She heard the ice clinking in glasses, the hum of the air conditioning, the subtle rustle of designer suits as players adjusted in their chairs. Every movement was a signal, and she absorbed them all. They dealt the first hand. She took the cards gently, holding them so no one else could see. A small, instinctive act of respect for the game. One man across the table, a real estate mogul with a face lined by too many late nights, raised his eyebrow and smirked. He tapped his ring twice against his stack of chips, an unconscious tell Naomi had already noticed. The billionaire leaned forward. "All right, sweetheart, your move." For a heartbeat, she froze. Then she inhaled, remembering her father's voice. Numbers never lie. People do. She looked at the cards, low, unsuited, worthless. But she didn't fold immediately. Instead, she watched. The billionaire's eyes flickered briefly to the left in patience. The mogul twirled his cuffling nervous confidence. Naomi gently pushed her cards forward and folded, meeting no one's gaze. It was just the first hand, but it made the billionaire pause. Second hand, she drew a pair of eights. Better but risky, this time. Naomi noticed something. The billionaire's smile stiffened for a fraction of a second when he glanced at his own cards. The real estate mogul hesitated before his bet. The delay was almost imperceptible, but to Naomi it felt loud. She remembered probabilities. A pair of eights wasn't unbeatable, but good enough if others were bluffing. With the smallest motion, she matched the mogul's bet. The billionaire raised. The pot grew. When the last card fell, Naomi read the board. And the men's reactions, not the cards alone, she called. The mogul threw down his cards with frustration. The billionaire showed nothing. Naomi revealed her eights. She won. The dealer quietly slid a pile of chips toward her. The girl in the neat braids, who should have been outmatched by experience, had just outplayed them all, and done it calmly. For the first time, the billionaire stopped smiling. It was supposed to be amusing, humiliating the driver's daughter, proving how power trumped innocence. But now, the amusement was wearing thin. His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, though his voice held the faintest note of doubt. But Naomi wasn't smiling either. Winning didn't make her giddy. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, her throat dry, but she kept her hands still because she knew the real test wasn't a single win. It was what happened next. Third hand. The billionaire raised heavily, trying to intimidate. Naomi noticed his left eyebrow twitch, something that hadn't happened before. Was it a bluff? She scanned the table. The mogul avoided eye contact. Another man sipped his drink too fast. She decided, call. The dealer revealed the cards. Naomi's quiet breath caught. She had a straight. She won again. Now, the room's atmosphere changed completely. The laughter stopped. The bartender shifted uncomfortably. Even the billionaire's closest friends exchanged wary glances. They had expected a few minutes of entertainment, not to watch a child calmly dismantle seasoned players. David, standing silently near the door, felt pride and dread twist inside him. Pride that Naomi's brilliance was shining. Dread of what would happen if the billionaire felt mocked, fourth hand this time. The billionaire stared hard at Naomi. His voice dropped. "Little one, do you even know what you're doing?" Naomi met his gaze. For the first time, she spoke. At the table, watching. One word, soft, fearless, and true. The billionaire's lips tightened. The others barely breathed. As cards fell, Naomi's face stayed serene. But inside, her mind raced, counting, remembering, the calculating odds she'd taught herself at night. When she should have been asleep, she noticed the billionaire's breathing deepen as he drew his card. His thumb tapped twice against his chips. A tell of uncertainty. He bet big. Naomi paused. The pot was enormous now, too big for a child to risk. But Naomi wasn't just playing cards. She was playing people. She called the billionaire, flipped his cards. The sharp motion, nothing Naomi, revealed her modest pair. A gasp rippled through the room. She had called his bluff. At 10 years old, the driver's daughter had beaten a billionaire in his own game. For a moment, no one spoke. The billionaire leaned back, expression unreadable. Around the table, respect and disbelief mixed in every glance cast toward Naomi. And David, heart pounding against his ribs, realized this wasn't just a game anymore. His daughter had become the center of the table and maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous player there. But the night wasn't over. The billionaire's pride had taken a wound, and a man like that never lets himself bleed without fighting back for. A while, the billionaires chuckled at every move Naomi made. They called her kiddo, ruffled her braids, and watched her stack of chips with amused curiosity. But then, the room changed. Naomi had been folding small, winning cautiously, always studying, always quiet. But in one hand, something shifted. Her gaze locked onto the billionaire himself, and her small fingers tapped the table once, twice, 3 times, as if she'd solved a puzzle no one else could see. He raised an eyebrow. "Feeling brave, little one?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pushed her chips forward, calmly, almost gently, calling his massive raise. The room fell into a hush. Even the bartender paused mid-polish, eyes on the table. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, smirk frozen just a bit too long. "All right," he murmured, voice soft but edged with steel. "Let's play then." Cards turned. Gasps rose. Naomi didn't blink. She read the billionaire's knuckles tightening against the felt. The twitch in his jaw, the way his left hand reached unconsciously for his whiskey glass. All the signs her father had taught her to see, and the rest she'd taught herself. He was bluffing. Worse, he was desperate not to be caught. Naomi's father, David, stood frozen behind her, his throat dry, heart slamming against his ribs. So hard he felt dizzy. In that single moment, The years of quiet lessons and whispered math problems flashed before him like lightning. Had he given her enough, or was he about to watch the people at this table break her right in front of him? Then Naomi spoke. Her voice was soft, too soft for the cameras, but loud enough for the billionaire to hear. "You don't have it," she said, for words, no accusation.
Oh.
No fear, just calm certainty. The billionaire's face changed. The smirk wavered, the room's air seemed to stiffen. A man used to controlling the game now found himself being read not by a rival CEO or seasoned card shark, but by a child whose feet didn't even reach the floor. "Excuse me?" he asked, trying to chuckle, but the sound caught in his throat. Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "You're bluffing," she repeated, "and I'm calling." Cards flipped. She was right. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then a ripple gasps, scattered applause, shocked laughter. Naomi's father felt tears sting his eyes. Pride and relief flooding through him so fiercely his knees almost buckled. The billionaire stared at the cards, then at Naomi, truly looking at her, maybe for the first time. His mask cracked, just enough for the child to see the man behind it. Powerful, yes, but human, fallible, and surprised. "You're good," he admitted under his breath. But for Naomi, this wasn't about chips or praise. This was about the lesson her father had given her since she could first count. Numbers never lie. People do. The billionaire, stung by humiliation but too proud to stop, doubled down. Another hand, another try. But now, the weight of the room had shifted. Every player knew the little girl at the table wasn't just playing cards. She was reading souls. The billionaire tried everything. Small talk, jokes, fake tells. Naomi listened, but her eyes kept seeing the truth behind every word in the final hand. She made her boldest move yet. A bet so confident, so calm, that even the billionaire hesitated before calling again. Her read was perfect. Again, she won in that breathless silence. Naomi didn't cheer or grin. She simply gathered her chips, hands steady, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The billionaire sat back, exhaled, and for the first time all night, looked at her with genuine respect and perhaps a hint of fear, because true power isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes it's a quiet mind that can see through walls people build around themselves. Behind her, David stood taller than he ever had in his life. His daughter had not just played the game, she'd mastered it and done it with grace. His heart ached with pride in something else. The realization that the little girl he'd taught was now teaching the world who she really was, in that single turning point. Naomi had done more than win chips. She'd defended her father's dignity, shattered the billionaire's illusion of control, and proven something the world so often forgets, that genius, courage, and quiet strength can come from places the powerful never bother to look. And in that moment, everyone saw Naomi truly saw her. For the very first time, the final hand had been played. The chips scattered like fallen crowns, and for a moment, the room was silent, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Naomi, the driver's daughter, sat there breathing quietly, the smallest figure in a room built for giants. Her father watched her, pride and relief battling in his chest. And the billionaire, the man who thought he'd invited a child only to amuse his guests, now studied her not as a curiosity, but as an equal, perhaps even as something rarer, a player who had surprised him. Slowly, he leaned back, a thin, measured smile creeping onto his face. "You're very good," he admitted, voice lower, the bravado replaced by something closer to respect, or was it fear? Naomi didn't gloat, didn't boast. She simply gathered her small stack of chips, her gaze calm and unshaken. In that moment, the room seemed to see her not as the driver's daughter, but as someone in complete control of herself and of the game. The billionaire nodded once more, almost as if conceding not just a hand, but a piece of pride. "You've got something special, kid." David's hands were still trembling slightly when he rose to help his daughter off the back chair. "What?" But when Naomi's feet touched the floor, she stood tall, her shoulders back. I had walked into that room as a quiet child from the shadows. She walked out as something far more dangerous to those who judged her. undeniable. As they stepped toward the polished doors, Naomi glanced back at the table. For the first time, she saw it not as a place of intimidation, but as a board, where minds, not money, were the real currency. Outside, under the cool night sky, David finally let out a shaky breath. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, voice breaking on the words he had practiced silently so many times before. Naomi smiled softly, leaning her head against his arm. "You taught me everything, Daddy." They drove home through sleeping streets, the glittering towers fading into the darkness behind them. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. Both knew what had really happened tonight. It wasn't about winning a few hands of poker. It was about Naomi proving to the room, to the billionaire, and to herself, that brilliance can live anywhere. Even in the child of a man who waited by curbs in the rain, the world would still see David as just a driver, and Naomi as just a little girl. But something had shifted forever. Because after tonight, Naomi knew she could sit at any table, face anyone, and hold her ground. And the billionaire? He might never admit it aloud, but he'd learned something too, sometimes. The mind you dismiss is the one that can see right through your game. The car hummed quietly as it carried them away from marble floors and glass. Towers back to cracked sidewalks and quiet streets. But inside that car, something had changed forever. Naomi glanced at her father, who still seemed lost in thought, replaying every moment, every risk he'd taken by letting her sit at that table. And in that soft, reflective silence, something beautiful bloomed. Pride, relief, and a new kind of hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wouldn't always be the same cold place it had always been. And now, dear viewer, let me turn this moment toward you. Tonight, you witnessed something more than a poker game. You saw a child no one expected to shine. A father who quietly built his daughter's mind into an unbreakable fortress. And a billionaire who learned, perhaps for the first time, that brilliance doesn't ask permission before it shows itself. In this story, there was no crown to win, no kingdom to claim, no trophies to hold up to the cameras. The prize was something far rarer: dignity. The chance for a little girl, the daughter of a man the world called, just a driver, to prove to those who live above the clouds that genius has no uniform, no pedigree, no address. And isn't that something worth remembering? That sometimes it isn't money, status, age that wins the game, but the courage to sit at the table and play anyway. So now, as we close this story, let me ask you a question. Not as a narrator, but as another human being. How many children like Naomi live in your city? How many bright minds sit quietly behind classroom desks, unnoticed, uncalled upon, while someone else's voice always takes the spotlight? How many brilliant young girls and boys never get invited to the table, not because they aren't ready, but because no one believes they could belong? How different could the world look if even one person dared to see them? Maybe you've met a Naomi. Maybe you were Naomi once. The quiet kid, overlooked, underestimated, but quietly building. A mind sharper than anyone imagined. If that's you, remember this. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. You don't need someone to hand you a seat. Sometimes you pull out the chair yourself, sit down, and show them why you belong. And if you're someone who can invite someone else to the table, whether it's a classroom, a meeting, or even a conversation, then do it. Because you never know whose story you might help change. In the end, Naomi's story isn't just about a little girl who won a hand of poker. It's about all the unseen battles children fight, when the world decides their worth before they even open their mouths. And it's about the people, fathers, mothers, mentors, even strangers who refuse to let that be the last word. David couldn't buy Naomi a seat among billionaires, but he gave her something richer, a mind trained to see truth, to read people, to stay calm when the world laughs. That gift was built over long nights, quiet encouragement, and countless moments of love. It was invisible to the billionaires until it was so. So if this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep in your chest, don't let it end here. Like this video, not for the numbers. but to tell the platform that these are the stories that deserve to be heard. Share it with someone who might need reminding. You don't need permission to show your brilliance. Comment below. Tell us, have you ever felt underestimated? What did you do when it was your turn to sit at the table? Your words might just light a spark for someone else watching tonight. And if you'd like to hear more stories like Naomi's true, raw, and powerful stories that prove genius can come from anywhere, then subscribe. Because there are countless untold stories still waiting. And together, we can bring them to light before we part. Remember this, Naomi's story isn't just hers. It's a reminder to every quiet child, every unseen mind, every nobody in someone else's eyes. You don't have to be invited to matter. You don't have to look the part to change the game. And sometimes, the greatest strength isn't loud confidence, it's quiet brilliance, waiting for its moment to shine tonight. She found hers, and maybe tomorrow it'll be yours.